everybody had enough to eat?
Yes, thank you.
Hello, Frank.
Glad you didn't wait for me.
I just like a little something with my coffee, and breakfast squares is a little something, nourishing.
During the 1960s, American families had 30 incredible suppers hiding in their Betty Crocker cookbooks that most people today have completely forgotten. These hearty meals helped entire families gather around dinner tables during the busiest decade in modern American history. Let's uncover these forgotten suppers that our grandparents relied on when home cooking truly mattered. Tuna noodle casserole. In church cookbooks of 1965, this recipe appeared more than any other for good reason. Every kitchen cupboard held the secret ingredients for pure comfort: wide egg noodles, solid white tuna, cream of mushroom soup, and frozen peas, all baked under a golden crown of buttered breadcrumbs. The genius was in the simplicity, combining pantry staples into something that tasted like hours of careful cooking. She'd boil the noodles just shy of tender, fold in that creamy mixture, then top with breadcrumbs that turned golden and crispy. Priced like peanuts, but treated like treasure, these casseroles could feed 8 people for under $2 while creating the kind of satisfaction that made families gather around the table. Stuffed green peppers. One neighbor swore this was the only way to make children eat their vegetables without a fight. Walk into any American kitchen in 1963, and you'd smell these beautiful green bells bubbling in the oven. Ground beef mixed with cooked rice, diced onions, and just enough tomato sauce to bind everything together, all stuffed into bright green pepper shells. The secret was parboiling those peppers first, making them tender enough to eat, but sturdy enough to hold their precious cargo. She'd hollow out each pepper carefully, stuff them full of that seasoned mixture, then bake them until the tops turned golden and the peppers became fork tender. At a time when moms juggled jobs and PTA meetings, families could stretch 1 pound of ground beef into a meal that looked elegant enough for company. Contemporary food writers in the early 1960s called them little green presents on every plate. Ham and Scalloped Potatoes. Picture the Sunday when leftover ham became Monday's celebration through sheer kitchen wizardry, when paper-thin potatoes meet smoky ham in layers of pure comfort, sliced potatoes arranged like fallen dominoes with chunks of ham scattered throughout and a rich cheese sauce poured over everything. The genius was in the slow baking that allowed those potatoes to absorb every drop of ham flavor while becoming creamy and tender. She'd use a sharp knife to slice those potatoes paper-thin, layer them with ham and onions, then cover with a sauce made from scratch. The cheese melted into golden perfection while the edges got crispy and the center stayed creamy. Stretched pennies into plenty, this recipe could turn Sunday's leftover ham into Monday's celebration. Frankfurter supper dish. This was the dish that proved any ingredient could become elegant with the right treatment. Picture Betty's test kitchen in 1966, where they discovered that Frankfurters could become the star of an elegant casserole that won over even the toughest critics. Sliced hot dogs layered with mashed potatoes, green beans, and a savory sauce that brought everything together in perfect harmony. The secret was treating those Frankfurters like premium sausage, browning them first to develop deep flavor before adding them to the casserole. Layer everything in a buttered dish, top with more mashed potatoes, then bake until golden and bubbling. The magic happened when those simple hot dogs absorbed all the other flavors while adding their own smoky richness to every bite. Sloppy Joe hot dish. From Minnesota church basements came this brilliant solution to messy sandwich problems. Walk into 1965 and discover how creative cooks transformed that messy handheld favorite into a proper sit-down supper. Ground beef simmered in that classic sweet and tangy sauce, then layered in a casserole dish with mashed potatoes on the bottom and biscuit dough on top. The genius was in the layering, creating a complete meal that captured all the flavors of the original sandwich while making it suitable for Sunday dinner. She'd brown the beef with onions, Add that signature sauce, then assemble everything in a deep baking dish before sliding it into the oven. What came out was pure Midwest comfort that satisfied the heartiest appetites while keeping hands clean and manners intact. Chicken a la king, the dish that brought hotel elegance to every American dining room, started in fancy restaurants but found its true home in family kitchens. Step into 1962 and watch Mama transform leftover chicken into something that looked like it belonged in a fancy hotel. Diced chicken breast, colorful bell peppers, sliced mushrooms, and sweet green peas, all swimming in a velvety white sauce made from scratch. The real genius was serving it in those golden puff pastry shells that Betty's recipe perfected for home ovens. She'd ladle the creamy mixture right into the warm shells, creating an elegant presentation that made every family feel like they were dining at the Ritz. Corned beef hash with eggs. In an era when nothing went to waste, yesterday's dinner became this morning's triumph with brilliant simplicity. Picture a 1967 diner-style breakfast that could anchor any supper table when times called for hearty, stick-to-your-ribs satisfaction. Diced corned beef mixed with cubed potatoes, onions, and just enough seasoning to wake up every taste bud on the plate. The magic happened in the skillet, where everything got crispy and golden on the bottom while staying tender on top. She'd dice leftover corned beef fine, mix it with cooked potatoes, then cook it in a cast-iron skillet until it formed that beautiful crust. Top with fried eggs, and you had a complete meal that could satisfy the hungriest working man or growing teenager. The secret ingredient was a splash of Worcestershire sauce that deepened all the flavors and made this taste like it came from the best diner in town. During post-war prosperity, this became the ultimate way to stretch expensive corned beef into multiple meals. Local newspapers in the late 1960s featured it as the dish that proves leftovers can be better than the original. Macaroni and cheese with hot dogs. When suburbia met convenience cooking, children finally got a protein upgrade that made parents cheer. Walk into any busy kitchen in 1968 and discover how creative mothers turned simple mac and cheese into a complete supper that satisfied both children and adults. Elbow macaroni swimming in the cheesiest sauce imaginable, studded with sliced hot dogs that added both protein and excitement to every forkful. The genius was in the cheese sauce, made from scratch with real butter, flour, milk, and enough sharp cheddar to make it irresistibly creamy and rich. She'd cook the macaroni just until tender, slice the hot dogs into perfect rounds, then fold everything into that golden cheese sauce before baking until bubbly. The hot dogs added a smoky saltiness that balanced the rich cheese while providing the protein that turned this into a real meal rather than just a side dish. And just when you thought comfort food couldn't get any better, the next dish took leftovers to a whole new level that had neighbors begging for the secret. Creamed chicken on biscuits. Church ladies knew this secret weapon could transform yesterday's roast into today's celebration. Step into Betty's kitchen in 1963, where they perfected the art of transforming yesterday's roast into today's celebration of creamy, satisfying perfection. Tender pieces of chicken folded into a rich white sauce made with real butter, flour, and milk, seasoned with just enough pepper and herbs to make every bite sing with flavor. The magic was in the sauce consistency, thick enough to coat the chicken beautifully, but smooth enough to ladle perfectly over fresh, hot biscuits that soaked up every precious drop. She'd make the sauce from scratch in the same pan where the chicken had been roasted, using those flavorful drippings to create depth that no shortcut could match. Spanish rice bake. Before international cuisine invaded America, this was suburbia's passport to exotic adventure. Picture 1964, when adventurous cooks discovered that a few simple spices could turn ordinary ingredients into something that tasted like it came from a Spanish cafe. Long-grain rice mixed with ground beef, diced tomatoes, green peppers, and onions, all seasoned with paprika and cumin that added warmth and color to every grain. The genius was in the one-dish baking method that allowed all those flavors to meld together while the rice absorbed every drop of the seasoned liquid. She'd brown the beef first to develop deep flavor, add the vegetables and spices, then stir in the rice and liquid before covering and baking until tender. What emerged was a complete meal that looked and tasted exotic while using ingredients available at any neighborhood grocery store. Swiss steak. This was the dish that proved patience trumped expensive ingredients every single time. Step into 1965 and watch Betty Crocker transform budget-friendly round steak into a supper that could grace any Sunday table with pride and satisfaction. The magic began with pounding flour into the meat, tenderizing it while creating a coating that would thicken the braising liquid into rich, savory gravy. She'd dredge each piece in seasoned flour, brown it in hot oil until golden, then nestle it in a bed of sliced onions and tomatoes before covering and baking slowly. The long, gentle cooking broke down the tough fibers while concentrating all the flavors into a gravy so rich and delicious that families would use bread to soak up every precious drop. Turkey Fricassee. After Thanksgiving came this elegant encore that often surpassed the original performance. Picture November 1966, when creative cooks discovered that holiday leftovers could become something even more delicious than the original feast when treated with proper respect and technique. Tender pieces of turkey gently simmered in a rich, creamy sauce with carrots, celery, and pearl onions that added both color and sweetness to every spoonful. The genius was in the sauce preparation, using the turkey bones to make a rich stock that became the foundation for a velvety gravy that coated every ingredient with luxurious flavor. Shepherd's pie. From British tradition came this American adaptation that proved comfort food could compete with fancy restaurant fare. Step into Betty's test kitchen in 1965, where they discovered that proper layering and seasoning could elevate simple ingredients into something that rivaled expensive restaurant entrees. The foundation started with ground beef, browned with diced onions and seasoned with Worcestershire sauce, fresh thyme, and just enough tomato paste to add depth and richness. The magic was in the vegetable layer, a colorful mixture of carrots, peas, and corn that added sweetness and nutrition between the seasoned beef and creamy mashed potatoes. The secret to the perfect mashed potato topping was adding cream cheese and butter that made it incredibly smooth and rich, then using a fork to create decorative ridges that turned golden during baking. Layer everything carefully in a deep casserole dish, starting with the seasoned beef mixture, adding the vegetable layer, then spreading those beautiful mashed potatoes evenly across the top. The genius was in the final touches, brushing the potato surface with melted butter and sprinkling with paprika that created a gorgeous golden crust when baked. Mrs. Catherine O'Brien claimed this became her signature dish because it made everyone feel like they were dining at a fancy club whenever she served it to family and friends who always requested the recipe. Contemporary food columnists in the mid-1960s wrote that this recipe proves that comfort food can be elegant when served to impress dinner guests who couldn't believe something so sophisticated started with such simple ingredients. Each serving was substantial enough to satisfy hearty appetites while being refined enough to serve to important company without any embarrassment. The preparation could be done entirely ahead of time, making it perfect for entertaining or busy weeknight dinners when time was at a premium. Today, you'll spend about $22 for similar shepherd's pie dishes at gastropubs, but this fed 8 people under $4 while creating an atmosphere of warmth and satisfaction that brought families together around shared meals. Cabbage and noodles. In Eastern European neighborhoods, this humble dish carried the weight of tradition and the promise of satisfaction. Walk into any immigrant kitchen in 1963 and discover how simple cabbage could become the star of a hearty supper that stretched budgets while filling hearts. hearts. Wide egg noodles tossed with butter-sautéed cabbage, onions, and just enough caraway seeds to add an authentic old-world flavor that connected families to their heritage. The magic happened in the skillet, where cabbage slowly caramelized until it turned golden and sweet, transforming from a humble vegetable into something that tasted almost like candy. She'd slice the cabbage thin, then cook it slowly in butter with onions until both became tender and golden, creating a mixture that coated the noodles with incredible flavor. The secret ingredient was a splash of vinegar that brightened all the flavors while adding just enough acidity to balance the richness of the butter and sweetness of the caramelized vegetables. When American prosperity met old country wisdom, immigrant families discovered this combination could provide a complete meal using ingredients that cost almost nothing but delivered satisfaction that money couldn't buy. The technique required patience, allowing the cabbage to cook slowly until it released its natural sugars and developed that beautiful golden color that made this simple dish look as good as it tasted. Contemporary food writers in the early 1960s noted that this dish proves that the most satisfying meals often come from the humblest ingredients when prepared with proper technique and genuine care. Each serving was hearty enough to satisfy working men while being economical enough to stretch tight budgets during difficult times. The combination of textures, from tender noodles to silky cabbage to slightly crunchy onions, created interest in every bite that kept families coming back for more. Today, you might find similar dishes at Eastern European restaurants for $12 to $15, but this fed 6 people for under $1 while honoring traditions that connected families to their ancestral roots and cultural heritage. Shrimp wiggle. Church supper committees discovered this secret weapon that made canned seafood taste like coastal luxury. Picture 1967, when creative cooks discovered that canned shrimp could become the star of an elegant casserole that impressed guests while using ingredients from any pantry. Tiny shrimp folded into a rich cream sauce with peas and hard-boiled eggs, all served over toast points or rice that soaked up every drop of that incredible sauce. The genius was in the sauce preparation, making a true bechamel from scratch that created the perfect base for the delicate shrimp without overpowering their sweet ocean flavor. She'd make a roux with butter and flour, slowly whisk in milk until smooth and creamy, then gently fold in the shrimp and vegetables just before serving to preserve their texture. The name might have been silly, but the results were anything but, creating a dish that looked and tasted like it came from an expensive seafood restaurant. The secret was in the gentle cooking, never allowing the sauce to boil once the shrimp were added, which kept them tender instead of tough and rubbery. Turned pantry staples into restaurant elegance, these shrimp suppers could make canned seafood taste fresh and elegant when prepared with proper technique and genuine care for quality. The hard-boiled eggs added both protein and visual interest, their bright yellow yolks creating beautiful color contrast against the pink shrimp and green peas. Contemporary food editors in the late 1960s featured it as the dish that proves elegance doesn't require expensive ingredients, because it demonstrated how proper technique could transform humble pantry staples. The presentation was just as important as the preparation, served in individual ramekins or over-delicate toast points that made each serving feel special and sophisticated. Today, you'll spend about $24 for similar shrimp preparations at seafood restaurants, but this fed 6 people for under $3 while creating an atmosphere of elegance that made ordinary suppers feel like celebrations worth remembering and sharing with future generations. Meatloaf with Hardboiled Egg Center, one creative cook discovered how to turn America's most predictable dinner into a conversation piece that amazed every guest. Step into 1964 and discover how creative cooks transformed ordinary meatloaf into a conversation piece that amazed every guest at the dinner table. ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, onions, and seasonings, formed around a row of hard-boiled eggs that created beautiful slices when cut, revealing perfect circles of yellow and white in every serving. The magic was in the assembly technique, pressing half the meat mixture into a loaf pan, arranging the eggs down the center, then covering with the remaining meat and sealing the edges carefully. She'd boil the eggs until perfectly hard, cool them completely, then nestle them into the meat mixture like hidden treasures waiting to be discovered. The genius was in the presentation, each slice revealing those perfect egg centers that made this ordinary dish look like something from a fancy European restaurant. The eggs added both visual drama and extra protein while keeping the meatloaf incredibly moist and flavorful throughout the cooking process. Surprised even the most jaded dinner guests, this technique could make ordinary meatloaf special enough for company dinners while using ingredients that most families kept on hand. The preparation required a bit more planning than regular meatloaf, but the spectacular results made it worth every extra minute of effort and attention to detail. Contemporary food magazines in the mid-1960s featured it as the meatloaf that makes dinner guests gasp with delight because it combined familiar comfort with unexpected surprise. The technique could be adapted with different seasonings or vegetables, but the basic concept of hiding eggs inside the meat remained the same, regardless of variation. Each slice was like unwrapping a present, revealing those beautiful egg centers that made even children excited about eating their dinner. Today, you might find similar preparations at upscale comfort food restaurants for $18 to $22, but this fed 8 people for under $3, while creating memories that lasted long after the last bite was finished. Each slice was like unwrapping a present, revealing those beautiful egg centers that made even children excited about eating their dinner. Today, you might find similar preparations at upscale comfort food restaurants for $18 to $22, but this fed 8 people for under $3, while creating memories that lasted long after the last bite was finished. Chicken Croquettes. Society pages whispered about these golden gems that transformed humble leftovers into elegant dinner party stars. Picture 1963, when Betty Crocker's test kitchen perfected the art of transforming yesterday's roast chicken into golden, crispy croquettes that looked like they belonged in a fancy French restaurant. The secret started with finely minced chicken mixed with thick white sauce, seasoned with just a whisper of nutmeg and a generous pinch of fresh parsley from the garden. The magic was in the technique, shaping the mixture into perfect cylinders, then coating each one in beaten egg and fine breadcrumbs before frying them to golden perfection. The outside became incredibly crispy, while the inside stayed creamy and rich, creating a texture contrast that made every bite absolutely delightful. What made Betty's version special was serving them with a mushroom cream sauce that complemented the chicken without overpowering its delicate flavor. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson served these every Thursday at her bridge club, and the ladies would arrive early just hoping for an extra serving because they represented something truly special in home cooking. The preparation required patience and attention to detail, but the elegant results made it worth every minute of careful work and precise technique. Contemporary society pages in the early 1960s featured them as the perfect dinner party food because they could be prepared ahead and fried just before serving, making entertaining much easier. Each croquette was substantial enough to satisfy hearty appetites, but refined enough to impress the most sophisticated guests who expected restaurant-quality food. The technique required understanding how to balance moisture and seasoning in the chicken mixture, ensuring it held together during frying while remaining creamy inside. Today, you'll spend about $25 to $30 for similar chicken preparations at upscale restaurants, But this elegant dish fed 6 people for under $4 while creating an atmosphere of sophistication that made ordinary evenings extraordinarily special and memorable for everyone fortunate enough to be invited. Tamale Pie. When Mexican border flavors met Midwest convenience, this cultural bridge satisfied both authenticity and accessibility. Walk into 1965 and discover how creative cooks brought the essence of tamales to family dinner tables without requiring the time-intensive masa preparation that intimidated most home cooks. Ground beef, seasoned with chili powder, cumin, and paprika, layered with corn kernels and topped with a cornbread crust that baked into golden perfection. The genius was in the spice blend that created authentic Mexican flavors using ingredients available at any American grocery store, making exotic cuisine accessible to suburban families. She'd brown the beef with onions, add tomatoes and spices, then layer everything in a casserole dish before topping with cornbread batter that baked into a beautiful golden crust. The cornbread absorbed some of the spicy meat flavors while maintaining its own sweet, crumbly texture that provided perfect contrast to the savory filling below. But this dish represented something far more significant than mere convenience cooking. It was cultural diplomacy served on a dinner plate. In an era when international travel remained a luxury for most American families, Tamale Pie offered a passport to exotic flavors that expanded horizons without requiring families to venture beyond their comfort zones. The secret ingredient was a can of creamed corn mixed into the cornbread batter, which kept it incredibly moist while adding extra corn flavor that tied the whole dish together beautifully. Contemporary food writers in the mid-1960s praised it as the dish that brings international flavors to American dinner tables without requiring expensive ingredients or extensive preparation time. Today, you'll spend about $17 to $22 for similar Mexican-American fusion dishes at casual restaurants. But this fed 8 people for under $3 while expanding culinary horizons and introducing families to flavors that would become increasingly popular in American cuisine over the following decades. Codfish Cakes. From New England fishing villages came this thrifty treasure that transformed preserved fish into golden coastal luxury. Step into 1966 New England and discover how thrifty cooks transformed preserved fish into golden patties that captured all the essence of coastal living in every bite. Salt cod soaked overnight, then flaked and mixed with mashed potatoes, eggs, and just enough onion to add flavor without overwhelming the delicate fish. The magic was in the soaking process that removed excess salt, while preserving the concentrated fish flavor that made these cakes so distinctive and memorable. She'd soak the cod for at least 12 hours, changing the water several times, then simmer it gently until it flaked easily with a fork. The genius was in the potato proportion, using just enough to bind the mixture while allowing the fish to remain the star of every golden, crispy cake. But codfish cakes represented far more than simple thrift cooking. They embodied the maritime soul of New England communities where the relationship between families and the sea defined entire ways of life. These weren't just recipes, they were cultural artifacts that connected coastal families to centuries of fishing traditions, to the rhythms of tides and seasons, and to the understanding that nothing from the ocean's bounty should ever be wasted or taken for granted. The preparation itself was a masterclass in transformation. Salt cod, which could appear unappetizing to the uninitiated, hard, gray, and intensely salty, became tender, flaky, and perfectly seasoned through the alchemy of proper soaking and gentle cooking. This process required patience and knowledge passed down through generations of fishing families who understood that the best flavors often required time and technique rather than expensive ingredients. Form the mixture into patties, dredge in flour, then fry in hot oil until they developed that beautiful golden crust that crackled between your teeth. The secret was in the oil temperature, hot enough to create immediate searing, but not so hot that the outside burned before the inside heated through completely. This technique created the perfect textural contrast that made each bite interesting. Crispy exterior giving way to tender, flaky interior that released concentrated ocean flavors with every chew. These maritime masterpieces could make preserved fish taste fresh and elegant when prepared with proper technique and attention to traditional methods. The tradition connected families to their maritime heritage while providing an economical way to serve protein that didn't require expensive fresh fish or complicated preparation. During harsh New England winters, when fresh fish became scarce and expensive, these cakes provided reliable nutrition that connected families to the sea's abundance even when storms kept boats in harbor. Contemporary food writers in the mid-1960s noted that these cakes prove that the simplest ingredients can create the most satisfying meals when treated with respect and proper technique. Today, you'll find similar preparations at New England seafood houses for $15 to $20, but these fed 6 people for under $2 while honoring traditions that connected coastal families to their cultural heritage and the bounty of the sea that sustained their communities for generations. Baked salmon loaf. Before fresh fish became affordable, this pantry magician transformed humble cans into elegant centerpieces. Picture Betty's Kitchen in 1963, where they discovered that humble pantry ingredients could create something that looked like it belonged on the finest buffet tables when prepared with proper technique and artistic presentation. Canned salmon, mixed with breadcrumbs, beaten eggs, and finely chopped celery, all baked in a loaf pan until golden, while developing flavors that rivaled fresh fish preparations. When prepared with proper technique and artistic presentation. Canned salmon, mixed with breadcrumbs, beaten eggs, and finely chopped celery, all baked in a loaf pan until golden, while developing flavors that rivaled fresh fish preparations. The magic was in the gentle handling that preserved the salmon's natural texture while binding everything together into a loaf that sliced beautifully for elegant presentation. She'd drain the salmon carefully, remove any skin or bones, then fold it gently with the other ingredients to maintain those beautiful flakes that made each slice interesting and appealing. The secret ingredient was a splash of lemon juice that brightened all the flavors while adding the acidity that made this taste fresh rather than simply canned. But this dish represented something profound about Depression-era cooking philosophy that carried forward into the prosperity of the 1960s. The understanding that elegance wasn't about expense, but about care. The salmon loaf became a symbol of resourceful dignity, proving that a family could maintain pride and grace even when budgets demanded creativity over luxury. Housewives discovered that the key wasn't hiding the fact that they used canned salmon. It was celebrating the transformation they could achieve through proper technique and thoughtful presentation. The genius was in the egg sauce that accompanied each serving, hard-boiled eggs chopped fine and stirred into a creamy white sauce that complemented the salmon perfectly. This wasn't just garnish, it was theater, transforming a simple loaf into a restaurant-worthy presentation that made guests feel genuinely pampered. The sauce served multiple purposes. It added richness that balanced the salmon's natural saltiness. It provided visual contrast with its golden color against the pink fish, and it elevated the entire dish from leftovers made fancy to sophisticated dinner party fare. The presentation was just as important as the preparation, slicing the loaf thick and serving with that golden egg sauce ladled over the top for visual drama. Each serving revealed beautiful flakes of salmon bound together in perfect harmony, creating textures that were both substantial and delicate. The technique could be adapted with different herbs or vegetables, but the basic principle remained the same. Treating humble ingredients with respect and skill could produce results that impressed even the most sophisticated palates. Made sophisticated presentations from humble ingredients, creative cooks could create restaurant-quality presentations using ingredients that cost a fraction of fresh fish while delivering flavors that impressed even the most sophisticated guests. Contemporary food magazines in the early 1960s featured it as elegant dining from pantry staples because it demonstrated how proper technique could transform everyday ingredients into something truly special. Today, you'll spend about $25 to $35 for salmon entrees at seafood restaurants, but this fed 8 people for under $3 while creating an atmosphere of elegance that made ordinary suppers feel like celebrations worth remembering. Oyster Pie. In sophisticated dining rooms of 1968, this luxurious creation became the ultimate symbol of entertaining excellence. Enter the sophisticated dining rooms where hostesses discovered that canned oysters could become the star of a dish that rivaled anything served in the finest restaurants along the eastern seaboard. Fresh oysters nestled in a rich, creamy sauce beneath a golden pastry crust that puffed magnificently during baking, creating drama worthy of the most important occasions. The foundation began with creating a delicate sauce that enhanced rather than masked the briny sweetness of the oysters, using their natural liquor as the base for incredible flavor. She'd drain the oysters carefully, reserving every drop of their precious liquor, then create a sauce using butter, flour, cream, and that concentrated oyster essence. The genius was in the gentle cooking that warmed the oysters without making them tough, preserving their tender texture while allowing the flavors to meld beautifully. This wasn't just cooking, this was culinary diplomacy. The oyster pie served as proof that American home cooks could master the most sophisticated preparations, rivaling anything European chefs might create, while maintaining distinctly American sensibilities about hospitality and abundance. The dish represented a perfect marriage of old-world sophistication and new-world accessibility, making luxury approachable without sacrificing elegance or authenticity. Layer the creamy oyster mixture in individual ramekins or one large baking dish, then top with pastry that baked into golden perfection while sealing in all those incredible flavors. The secret was in the pastry preparation, rolling it just thick enough to create a substantial crust without overwhelming the delicate filling that lay beneath. The timing was crucial, baking just long enough to set the pastry while keeping the oysters tender and the sauce silky smooth throughout. The preparation required understanding how to balance the richness of cream with the brininess of oysters, creating harmony rather than competition between ingredients. The serving ritual became part of the entertainment as guests watched in amazement while the hostess prepared the final presentation with the precision of a professional chef, creating theater along with cuisine. This dish represented the pinnacle of mid-century entertaining style, where presentation was just as important as flavor, and every element was designed to create an unforgettable dining experience. Created culinary theater from simple ingredients, this recipe could transform canned oysters into something that tasted like the finest coastal restaurant when prepared with proper technique and attention to detail. Contemporary food critics in the late 1960s declared it the dish that proves American home cooks can master the most sophisticated seafood preparations when served to impressed guests. Today, you'll spend about $40 to $50 for oyster preparations at upscale seafood restaurants, but accomplished hostesses could create this masterpiece for under $6 while providing their guests with an unforgettable dining experience that demonstrated both culinary skill and generous hospitality. Mock duck. The decade's most talked-about dinner party surprise proved creativity trumped expensive ingredients every time. Step into 1967 and discover how creative cooks transformed an inexpensive cut of beef into something that looked and tasted like expensive waterfowl when prepared with proper technique and theatrical presentation. Flank steak, butterflied and stuffed with savory bread dressing, then rolled and tied to create the shape of a small duck before roasting until golden and delicious. The magic was in the butterflying technique that opened the steak into a large, thin rectangle, perfect for spreading with stuffing and rolling into an elegant presentation. She'd score the meat carefully to ensure tenderness, then pound it gently until it reached uniform thickness that would cook evenly throughout the roasting process. The genius was in the stuffing preparation, using seasoned breadcrumbs mixed with herbs, onions, and just enough broth to create a moist filling that complemented the beef perfectly. But mock duck represented something deeper than mere culinary trickery. It embodied the American spirit of making do while refusing to settle for less. This was Depression-era ingenuity dressed up for prosperity, proving that creativity could triumph over limitation in ways that impressed rather than embarrassed. The dish became a conversation piece that allowed hostesses to tell a story while serving dinner, creating entertainment value that went far beyond simple nourishment. Preparation itself required both skill and showmanship. The butterflying technique demanded precision. One wrong cut could ruin the entire presentation. The stuffing had to be seasoned perfectly, moist enough to complement the beef, but not so wet that it would make the roll soggy. The tying technique was crucial, ensuring the duck maintained its shape during the long roasting process while developing that beautiful golden exterior that made the illusion complete. The presentation was everything, slicing it carefully to reveal the beautiful spiral of meat and stuffing that looked like something from a professional kitchen. Guests would gasp as the hostess carved the duck tableside, revealing the intricate pattern within each slice that proved this wasn't poultry at all, but rather a masterpiece of culinary deception that tasted every bit as good as it looked. Contemporary food writers in the late 1960s called it the dish that proves creativity is the best seasoning, because it demonstrated how imagination could transform ordinary ingredients into extraordinary dining experiences. Today, you'd pay about $35 to $40 for duck at upscale restaurants, but this impressive presentation fed 6 people for under $5 while creating conversation and amazement that lasted long after dinner ended. Cabbage roll casserole. Immigrant grandmothers discovered this brilliant shortcut that honored tradition while embracing modern convenience. Walk into 1968 and discover how clever cooks deconstructed the time-intensive process of individual cabbage rolls into a simple casserole that delivered all the same flavors without the tedious wrapping and rolling. Ground beef mixed with rice, onions, and seasonings, layered with chopped cabbage and tomato sauce, then baked until the cabbage became tender and the flavors melded into pure comfort. But this wasn't just about convenience. It was about cultural preservation in the face of American assimilation. Immigrant mothers found themselves caught between honoring their heritage and adapting to their children's increasingly American tastes. The traditional cabbage roll, or galumki, required an entire afternoon of careful preparation. Blanching cabbage leaves until pliable, mixing the filling with precise seasoning ratios, rolling each bundle with the skill passed down through generations, then arranging them like precious gifts in the baking dish. The casserole version democratized this labor of love, making it accessible to working mothers who had jobs outside the home, to daughters who hadn't learned the intricate rolling technique, and to American neighbors curious about ethnic flavors but intimidated by unfamiliar methods. The secret ingredient was a splash of vinegar that brightened all the flavors while adding the tangy note that made this taste authentically Eastern European, connecting it to the sauerkraut and pickled vegetables that defined the cuisine. When Old World recipes met New World schedules, immigrant families could honor their heritage while adapting to American convenience cooking that fit busy schedules and modern lifestyles. The dish provided all the comfort of traditional cabbage rolls while being approachable enough for children who might reject the more exotic wrapped version. Each serving delivered the perfect combination of meat, vegetables, and starch that satisfied hearty appetites while providing complete nutrition in one convenient dish. Contemporary home economists in the late 1960s featured it as the dish that proves tradition can adapt without losing its soul because it maintained authentic flavors while embracing modern convenience. Today, you'll find similar preparations at Eastern European restaurants for $16 to $20, but this fed 8 people for under $3 while honoring cultural traditions that connected families to their ancestral roots and immigrant heritage. Pot roast with root vegetables, Sunday tradition met kitchen alchemy in this time-honored ritual that brought 3 generations together. Step into 1964 and watch Betty Crocker perfect the art of slow cooking that transformed tough cuts of beef into fork-tender perfection while developing flavors that rivaled the finest steakhouses. Chuck roast seared until golden, then braised slowly with carrots, potatoes, onions, and celery until everything became incredibly tender and flavorful. This wasn't merely cooking. It was ritual. The pot roast represented something sacred in American family life, the promise that no matter how scattered the week became, Sunday would bring everyone home. The long cooking time wasn't a burden but a blessing, filling the house with aromas that announced family, tradition, and the kind of patient love that couldn't be rushed or replicated. The technique itself was a masterclass in transformation. Tough, inexpensive chuck roast, the kind of cut that would be leather if handled improperly, became silk through the alchemy of time, moisture, and gentle heat. The vegetables weren't just accompaniments. They were co-conspirators in the creation of flavor, their natural sugars caramelizing slowly, while their earthy essences infused the braising liquid that would become liquid gold. The secret was in the braising liquid, using beef broth enhanced with herbs and a splash of red wine that added depth and complexity to every element of the dish. The presentation was just as important as the preparation, slicing the tender beef and arranging it with the vegetables on a large platter that became the centerpiece of family gatherings. Contemporary food columnists in the mid-1960s wrote that this dish represents everything good about American family cooking because it demonstrated how patience and proper technique could create extraordinary results from ordinary ingredients. Today, you'll spend about $30 to $35 for similar braised beef at restaurants, but this fed a crowd for under $8 while creating memories that lasted for generations. Spaghetti pie. The year 1969 brought this architectural marvel that challenged every assumption about what pasta could become. Picture when creative cooks discovered that cooked spaghetti could be transformed into a stunning pie crust that held savory fillings and created conversation at every dinner table. Cooked spaghetti mixed with beaten eggs and Parmesan cheese, pressed into a pie pan to form a crust, then filled with ricotta cheese, meat sauce, and mozzarella before baking until golden and bubbly. This wasn't just cooking. This was edible architecture that challenged every assumption about what food could be. The genius was in the spaghetti crust technique that required understanding how the eggs would bind the pasta into a firm shell that held its shape while developing a beautiful golden color. The magic happened during the first baking stage, when the spaghetti crust set firmly enough to hold the filling while developing that golden color that made this look like a traditional pie. But spaghetti pie represented something far more profound than culinary novelty. It was the embodiment of American innovation applied to immigrant cuisine. Italian families had brought their pasta traditions across the ocean, but their children and grandchildren were finding new ways to honor those traditions while creating something distinctly American. The dish became a symbol of cultural evolution, showing how cherished recipes could adapt and transform while maintaining their essential character and meaning. The preparation itself was an exercise in patience and precision. The spaghetti had to be cooked to exactly the right texture, tender enough to be pliable but firm enough to maintain structure when pressed into the pan. The egg and cheese mixture required careful proportioning to ensure proper binding without overwhelming the delicate pasta flavor. The pressing technique was crucial, creating an even thickness that would cook uniformly while forming the distinctive ridged pattern that made each slice visually stunning. The layering process became an art form in itself. The ricotta mixture needed to be seasoned perfectly, smooth enough to spread evenly but thick enough to maintain distinct layers. The meat sauce couldn't be too watery, or it would compromise the structural integrity of the entire dish. The final cheese layer had to melt into golden perfection while creating a protective seal that held everything together during the crucial cooling period. The most dramatic moment came during serving, when the first slice revealed the beautiful cross-section that made guests gasp with amazement. Each piece showed distinct layers of pasta, cheese, and sauce arranged in perfect harmony, creating a visual feast that was almost too beautiful to eat. The texture contrasts were equally impressive, the slightly crispy pasta crust giving way to creamy ricotta, tangy meat sauce, and melted mozzarella that pulled into satisfying strings. Liver and onions. This became the ultimate kitchen battleground where proper technique could convert even the most stubborn skeptics. Step into 1966 and discover how proper preparation could transform one of the most divisive ingredients into something that even skeptics had to admit was delicious when cooked with respect and proper technique. Beef liver sliced thin, soaked in milk to remove any bitter flavors, then dredged in seasoned flour and seared quickly while sweet onions caramelized alongside until golden and fragrant. The magic was in the milk soaking that drew out any strong flavors while tenderizing the liver, making it approachable for even the most hesitant family members. She'd slice the liver no thicker than half an inch, soak it in milk for at least 30 minutes, then pat it dry before dredging in flour seasoned with salt, pepper, and a touch of paprika. The genius was in the quick cooking that kept the liver tender and pink inside, while developing a beautiful crust that sealed in all the natural flavors. But liver and onions represented far more than a simple protein preparation. It was a weekly test of culinary diplomacy that could either unite or divide entire families. The dish carried the weight of nutritional necessity balanced against the challenge of palatability, requiring mothers to master both technique and psychology to successfully serve this powerhouse of nutrition to reluctant children and skeptical spouses. Beef and noodle ring. In the height of 1960s entertaining sophistication, this spectacular presentation turned ordinary hostesses into dinner party legends. Enter the ambitious kitchen of 1967, where hostesses discovered that molded foods could transform ordinary ingredients into centerpieces worthy of the finest restaurants and most sophisticated entertaining. Wide egg noodles mixed with ground beef, cream cheese, and seasonings pressed into a ring mold, then baked until set and unmolded to reveal a stunning presentation that looked like professional catering. The foundation began with understanding how to balance moisture and binding agents to create a mixture that would hold its shape while developing beautiful color and texture during baking. She'd cook the noodles just until tender, brown the beef, with onions until deeply flavored, then combine everything with cream cheese and beaten eggs that would bind the mixture together while adding richness and stability to the final product. But this dish represented something far more significant than mere presentation theatrics. It embodied the 1960s obsession with entertaining sophistication that transformed ordinary home cooks into performance artists. The ring mold wasn't just a cooking vessel, it was a stage prop that allowed hostesses to create drama and conversation around food in ways that elevated simple family dinners into memorable experiences worthy of discussion and admiration. The technique required understanding the science of protein coagulation and starch gelatinization, ensuring the eggs would set the mixture without becoming rubbery, while the noodles maintained their individual texture within the molded form. The cream cheese provided richness and helped bind everything together while adding a subtle, tangy flavor that complemented the beef without overwhelming it. Each component had to be perfectly balanced to create a mixture that would hold together structurally while remaining tender and flavorful. Baked chop Sooie. The final frontier of 1960s fusion cuisine brought takeout flavors to suburban casserole convenience. Walk into 1968 and discover how creative cooks brought the essence of takeout favorites to family dinner tables without requiring woks, special ingredients, or complicated stir-frying techniques that intimidated most home cooks. Ground beef browned with onions and celery, mixed with bean sprouts, water chestnuts, and soy sauce, then topped with chow mein noodles and baked until crispy and golden. The magic was in the sauce combination that used ingredients available at any American grocery store to create flavors that reminded families of their favorite Chinese restaurant dishes. She'd brown the beef until well-colored, add vegetables in stages to maintain their crispness, then stir in a sauce made from soy sauce, Worcestershire sauce, and beef broth that tied everything together beautifully. The genius was in the chow mein noodle topping that provided crunch and visual interest while absorbing some of the savory flavors from below during the baking process. The secret ingredient was a can of water chestnuts that added the authentic crunch and mild flavor that made this taste like restaurant-quality chop suey rather than just seasoned ground beef. When exotic met familiar on American dinner tables, families could experience the flavors of Chinese cuisine without leaving their neighborhoods or learning unfamiliar cooking techniques that seemed beyond their capabilities. Contemporary food writers in the late 1960s praised it as the dish that brings international flavors home to American kitchens while maintaining the comfort and convenience that busy families needed for weeknight dinners. Today, you'll spend about $15 to $20 for similar Chinese-American dishes at casual restaurants, but this fed 6 people for under $3 while introducing families to flavors that would become increasingly popular in American cuisine over the following decades. These forgotten Betty Crocker suppers proved that home cooks could create restaurant magic every single night. But somewhere between convenience foods and takeout culture, we lost something precious, the understanding that the most meaningful meals often emerge from the simplest ingredients when prepared with love, patience, and the kind of kitchen wisdom that once passed from generation to generation like treasured family heirlooms. These 30 dishes represent more than just recipes. They're time capsules that capture an era when families gathered around dinner tables every evening, when mothers took pride in creating something special from whatever the pantry provided, and when the aroma of home cooking could call children home from blocks away. Each casserole, each carefully molded presentation, each clever transformation of leftovers into something extraordinary tells the story of American families who understood that food was about so much more than mere sustenance. From the familiar comfort of tuna noodle casserole to the theatrical surprise of mock duck, these dishes bridged the gap between necessity and celebration, proving that creativity and technique could transform even the most humble ingredients into something worthy of praise and memory. They honored both tradition and innovation, combining old-world wisdom with new-world convenience in ways that made exotic flavors accessible while keeping family budgets intact. Perhaps most remarkably, these dishes taught entire generations that cooking wasn't about perfection, it was about possibility. A can of tuna could become elegant shrimp wiggle. Leftover beef could masquerade as expensive duck. Even the strangest combinations, like hot dogs and macaroni and cheese, could create memories that lasted lifetimes. They showed that resourcefulness was its own form of artistry, that making do with what you had wasn't settling for less, it was discovering more. These mothers and grandmothers understood something we've forgotten in our age of abundance, that limitation sparks innovation, that creativity flourishes when we work within boundaries rather than despite them. Today, as we search for ways to reconnect with family, to slow down our hurried lives, and to find meaning in the everyday rituals that bind us together, these Betty Crocker suppers remind us that the kitchen has always been the heart of the home. They whisper stories of a time when cooking was an act of love rather than a chore, when creativity flourished under constraint, and when the simple act of preparing dinner became a daily expression of care that nourished both body and soul. These weren't just recipes, they were survival strategies, family glue, and symbols of pride in a decade of rapid change. So, tell me, if you had one of these suppers on your table tonight, which one would bring back the biggest smile? Share your memories of these classic suppers in the comments below, and let's keep these delicious traditions alive for future generations to discover and treasure.